Hello, vintage outboard motor fans. This is T-Mike here in South Louisiana making another video today. Today's video is going to be on the cooling system for a vintage outboard motor. We're going to discuss 5 different topics that ought to help you with the cooling system on your vintage motor. First topic we're going to talk about is why do we cool a motor? Why does it need to be cooled? All right. Second topic we're going to talk about is how we cool that motor. All right. The third topic is going to be how to test your motor to see if it's cooling properly. The fourth topic is going to be the flow of water through the whole outboard motor. We'll trace that actual flow. And the fifth topic is going to be how to troubleshoot your motor. If your motor is not cooling properly, I'm going to show you how to troubleshoot it with a few T-Mike tricks in there that ought to help you fix it. So if everybody's ready, here we go. And so the first topic we're going to discuss is why do we have to cool the motor? All right, pretty simple answer to that is that if we don't keep the moving parts of that power head cooled, they'll damage. There's only so much the pistons and the crankcase, the rods, the actual block itself, which is made out of dirty aluminum, has a threshold of temperature it can withstand before the parts break. So all combustible engines have to be cooled in one way or another. Your automobile engines have a radiator with air blowing across the radiator to cool the water that is run through the engine to keep it cool. In our case, our engine draws water from the lake or bayou that you have it in, which is cool, and it just runs it through and lets it go right back into the lake or the bayou to keep it cool. So that's why we have to cool the motor. And the second topic now we're going to talk about is how we cool that motor. So as I said, the vintage outboard motors and the newer motors cool the motor by taking water from whatever you're running it in, a lake or a bayou, and run it through and let it go out back into the water of the bayou. The average temperature that the motor tries to keep the motor running at is 165 degrees. All right, so there's an impeller that pulls the water up through your engine, and the bigger engines have thermostats in them that open up at 165 to try to keep the motor running at that degree. 212 degrees is boiling water. So if you test your motor and it's running more than 165 degrees, you have a problem. Topic number 3 is going to be how to test to see if your motor is cooling. So us old vintage outboard motor guys will always tell you if you don't have the proper test gear to test your motor and it's running and you want to see if it's cooling properly, just take your finger and set it on the power head, the top of the power head, or on the cylinder or on the exhaust panel, and if you can hold your finger on it without burning, you should feel warm, but you shouldn't have to pull your hand off. If you can put your hand on it and hold it there, then chances are it's cooling pretty good. You can also put your hand on the water that's coming out of the blowhole and feel the warmth of it. It shouldn't be hot, it shouldn't be steaming or anything, it should be just warm. The real way to test it is with a tool called a power meter. All right, this is a laser grip 774. You can get it on Amazon for $15. All right, it's got a laser on it that you can shoot on the power head, and it'll actually give you the temperature right here. And then once again, we're looking for 165 or cooler. Anything more than that, and it's not really doing well. All right, so here we go with topic number 4, which is the flow of the water through your motor. So it just so happens that I have a restore in process right now on one of my vintage motors, restore number 99, which is a 1956 Johnson 10 horsepower. So what am I going to do? I'm going to take all the parts that are involved in the cooling system and lay them out and show you the flow of the water through a vintage outboard. Alright, so I've got all the parts of my rebuild laid out kind of in order here, and we're going to trace the flow of water through a vintage outboard. So of course this gear case is in the water, right? It's the source of the water, comes up through a screen here, and there's also a passageway where it sucks the water in through these holes. All right, so that water, this unit is underwater. That water fills up. Here's the impeller housing the water pump. It has an impeller like this sitting in there that is attached to the drive shaft. When the engine is running, it is spinning in there, and it is propelling water out of the water pump here into this water tube that is stuck into here. All right, then there's a passageway in the housing here, right there where the water comes out. All right, and then it is fed into the power head right here, which is run through all the passageways of this exhaust housing. Comes up through here and runs down this port, down this passageway right here, cools all the cylinders, okay, and exits right here. All right, which goes back down through the exhaust chamber, through here, and exit through the blowhole. Now, one thing I didn't show you is there could be one other thing in the path of all that water, and that's a thermostat. So what I just showed you was a 10 horsepower, which does not have a thermostat in it. When you get up into the bigger horsepowers, they started putting thermostats in there to regulate the flow of water to maintain the proper temperature. So this is the chamber. Here is the thermostat. So the water comes up through here. The thermostat heats up. When it gets to 165 degrees, it pushes that spring through and allows the water to flow through this port, back down out through the blowhole. So this could be a point of trouble in your cooling system on your larger motors. Need to be able to check the thermostats, and I'm going to come back and give you a good way to check that in the next troubleshooting section. Alright, so now that we know all about the cooling system, why we cool the motor, the paths that they all run through, here comes the section that I'm sure you've all been waiting for, and that's how to troubleshoot your motor if it's not cooling. So you're running down the bayou doing just fine, you start seeing steam come out of your motor, or your motor starts running rough, you shut it off, and you pick up the cover and you touch your motor and it's hot. It's too hot to the touch. Well, you gotta idle back and not let it overheat or get pulled back in, because you'll burn that motor up. If it's not blowing water out of the blowhole, then it's not pumping water, and you'll burn that engine up. So you got to be careful and get it back. So you bring your motor back home, and now you got to figure out, what do I do now? What you do now is you find a T-Mike YouTube video that shows you how to do that. All right. So the number one problem, if your motor was working fine, was cooling, and all of a sudden it quit cooling, I would say that the number one problem is that it's just the passageways are blocked. If you just got through running through some weeds or in mud and all that, that can get in the pathway and block it. So if I were you, I would keep a little coat hanger in your boat, all right? About this piece of coat hanger about this long. While you're out on the water, pick up your motor and run that coat hanger through any passageway, the blowhole, the input, the little screen at the bottom could be clogged with water lilies. Just try to clean out all the input passageways under the water that you can. A lot of times that'll get you going. It'll get you going. If you do that and you're still not cooling well, come on back home and you probably got a bad impeller. Alright, these impellers are made out of rubber and the rubber ages. So the recommendation is to change your impeller every 2 years. Alright, a lot of people don't. They wait 4 or 5 years and that's good, but this rubber, what happens? The rubber hardens, the fins bend and they don't spring back and they lose their ability to pump water. If you watch your telltale pump and the water seems not to come out like it used to come out, your impeller is about to go bad. So change your impeller, and I have videos of that on how to change the impeller in all the vintage motors. Just refer to that if it is. So when you get home and you decide you're going to change the impeller, what I would recommend is you take the gear case off. You take the gear case off. I have videos on how to do that. Stick it in a 5-gallon bucket of water. Put a 1/2-inch drill on the end of it and spin it clockwise forward. Put your drill in forward clockwise and spin it. Submerge it where this is below the water, and you ought to see water pumping out of here, shooting out of here, like it would want to go up the water tube. If there's no water pumping out of here, then your trouble is the impeller. Change the impeller. I have a video on that. Put it back in the 5-gallon bucket. Spin it with the drill. You ought to see water shoot out about this high. Start spreading out like a fountain. If that's it, chances are you put it back on the motor and everything's going to work fine. All right? I have a video of that barrel test that you can look at too. So let's just say that all this happened to you while you're out on the bayou. It quit cooling. You come home, you take the lower unit off, you stick it in the barrel, in the bucket, and it is pumping water. And it's not the impeller. Don't go to all that trouble changing the impeller till you prove it is. If it passes the bucket test and it pumps, then you got a blockage somewhere in the pathways that we just talked about. Now it gets more difficult. The secret, Team Mike trick, which a lot of people know, is air. Most of you have an air compressor. Take your air while the gear case has been removed, right? When you go into the exhaust tube where this was stayed in, the water tube ought to be sitting right there. All right? The water tube ought to be sitting right there in the exhaust tube for you to see. Take your air and push it in here and hit it. That air, all right, ought to go through all the passageways that we just talked about earlier and come out the blowhole of the exhaust tube. So your water tube is sitting right here. Simply put your air hose to it and blow it. When you hit it at that water tube, air ought to come out of this blowhole. You ought to be able to put your hand right there, hit that water tube, and feel the air come out. If air's not coming out right here, then you've got a blockage somewhere up inside the power head or in the exhaust tube. Now you got to start taking all that apart to find that blockage. But it's kind of rare. It's kind of rare to have that. And most of the time, the blowing of the air through all these passageways will clear it and get your trouble going. All right? So, in summary for troubleshooting, if your engine's not cooling properly, don't run it. All right? You're going to burn the motor up. Bring it home. Take the gear case off. Stick it in a 5-gallon bucket and do the drill test on it. Shh. If it's not shooting water out, bad impeller. Change the impeller, shooting water out, put it back on, everything's going to be fine. She's going to be dispersing water like it should. All right? So that's how to troubleshoot your vintage motors. All right, so let's summarize. We talked about why we cool the motor. Pretty simple answer, so it doesn't burn itself up. The second of is how we do it, and we do it running water through the whole system at no higher than 165 degrees. All right, how do we test if cooling? Touch our finger on the motor, take a power meter and test it, okay? And then the fourth thing we talked about is the flow of the water, from the input of the water all the way back through the output. And then the fifth thing we talked about was how to troubleshoot a motor. All right, the bucket test is the best thing to test if you got a good impeller or not. And if you get that impeller working and put it back on and it's still not working, use air to clear all the passageways. Hope y'all enjoyed the video. See y'all next time.
I hope y'all enjoyed the video. Here at T Mike's Vintage Outboards, we're doing it one motor at a time. Please click on subscribe. I guarantee to provide weekly videos. Au revoir mes amis, and laissez les bon temps rouler.